Here is a continuation of Chapter 1 on preoperative room considerations. Last week we finished up with a lot of stuff on anesthetic circuits, anesthetic parts of the machine, a little bit of all that goes into providing anesthesia, and some of the perioperative equipment associated with that, including things like suction machines, electrocautery units, that sort of stuff. This week we start on surgical instruments, and while this isn't always the most fascinating or the most engaging and enthralling of subjects, it is important because you will see quite a few questions on the national boards on surgical instruments. And you really need to pay attention to this because this should be not only on my quizzes and exams, but also on the Veterinary Technician National Exam, some pretty easy points for you. Start off with the chapter this week on page 18 on surgical instruments, and they talk about manufacturing surgical instruments. And be aware of the terms that are associated with the manufacturing of surgical instruments, including forging, milling, tempering, passivation, and polishing. Those are all defined on page 18. Some good VT&E test questions would include knowing the parts of a surgical instrument. This is figure 1-40, page 19 from your text, and you need to know what the tips are, the jaws, the lock box, the shank, the ratchet, and the ring handles. Most of that's pretty simple. If you've worked in a practice very long, you're probably already more than familiar with all that stuff. And then the book jumps into exactly what each type of instrument is and what they are used for. And yes, as you go through these, you need to know what they are used for. There are quiz questions, there will be test questions, there will be VT&E questions on what each particular type of instrument is best suited for. For example, we begin on page 19 with general surgery instruments, scissors, and we start through the various major types of scissors. For example, there are operating scissors, know what operating scissors are, what they're specifically used for. Mayo dissecting scissors, Metzenbaum dissecting scissors, suture removal scissors. Need to know what each of those has a specialty for, and it's in your book. For example, the Metzenbaum dissecting scissors is used for delicate surgery or surgical dissection. The blades are thin, delicate, and appropriately 1/4 the instrument's overall length. The shaft is long and thin, and the blades can be straight or curved, and the book provides illustrations for that. So you not only need to know what they look like, you need to know what they're specific for. If you're following along in your book, this is on page 20, figure 1-42, showing you different types of scissors so they are easily identified. And then on the right hand side, that's figure 1-44, suture removal scissors. If you've been in practice very long, you certainly are going to be aware of suture removal scissors. Then the book gets into hemostats. Know your hemostats. Be able to identify the types of hemostat and know which hemostat is used for what. That would include the Halsted mosquitoes, Kelly's, Cryles, my old personal favorite, the Ferguson angiotribe, Rochester Carmalts, Rochester Peens. Those are all in there. Those are all defined. One suggestion is if you start to get them all blurred, what you do is you take and maybe make a picture, make a copy of the instrument, place that on a 3x5 card, and then on the back write the definition, or copy and then paste if you want to do that, the definition of and description of that particular type of instrument, and then you can look at them. Okay, what does it do? Flip it over, vice versa. VT&E time, easy review. More pictures from your book showing you the various types of blades. These are really some pretty good pictures of hemostats, figure 1-46, and I believe 1-45 from your textbook. Same is true of needle holders. Durf's, Olson Hager, Mayo Hager, Cryo Woods. Those are the major ones. The one you don't see, I don't think the book even mentions, that I love is Castro Viejos. I use a lot of Castro Viejo needle holders. Those are real good. But there's pictures. Know what they are. Know what they do. Know why we use them. Know which ones have the scissors integrated into the instrument itself. Of course, we need to know scalpels, scalpel handles, scalpel blades, Those are, again, illustrations. Page 22, you've got a number 3, number 4s. Occasionally you'll see some different types of scalpel handles, 7s, some others that are still floating around, and that's fine. And know your blades, okay? Know which blades are which. Know which ones are the regular blades and which ones the pointy blades, and know which ones the curvy blades and which ones the little blades. Know your thumb, tissue, forceps, or thummies. We sometimes refer to them as thummies. The DeBakey's, tissue, Russian, Alice, Adson. Most people are using Adson these days. Adson dressing, Adson brown, although sometimes you'll see some people refer to it as brown Adson. Adson 1 times 2. Lots of retractors. SENS, S-E-N-N. Although it's fun for students when you ask them to fill it in, sometimes fill in the blank, they always spell it S-I-N. It's a sin to use these retractors. SENS are a common type of retractors, manually held. 3 others that are commonly used. We've talked about the Gelpies before, also Wheatlanders, Balfours. These are all in your book, all described, all have good pictures. Towel clamps, Backus towel clamps, Rotor towel clamps, Jones towel clamps, Lorna or Edna towel clamps, all very common types of towel clamps we're going to see in veterinary practice. Of course, there's going to be some general instruments, some that are just kind of floating out there. That would include things like snook hooks or snook spay hooks, downing spay retractors, needle racks, groove directors, staple removers, surgical bowls. All things are going to be associated with surgery packs that may not be commonly used for every procedure. There are, of course, going to be some specialized soft tissue surgery instruments, things like Doyen and Babcock intestinal clamps. There's also going to be thoracic retractors. I believe your book has some pictures of those as well. You can look at those. Also, biopsy. There are biopsy punches. There are biopsy needle punches. There are bone biopsy specialized instruments. If you're in a practice that does any kind of orthopedic surgeries, you're going to find there's some specialized orthopedic surgical instruments, and there's some good pictures of these in your book. I'll refer you back to those as we go. Bone holders, periosteal elevators, bone rongeurs, bone cutters, bone curettes, hand chucks, all those wonderful little carpentry instruments that we have adapted for use in bone and orthopedic surgeries. Illustrations from the book, again showing you these specialized types of instruments. There on the left is a Kern bone holding forceps, and then there's a whole bunch on the right that are illustrated in your book and labeled. A couple of others. Top picture is a periosteal elevator. They call that a Freer periosteal elevator. It's still a periosteal elevator. And then on the right and below is a single action rongeur. I just love to say the word rongeur. Anytime you can say anything that might have a little bit of a French accent with it, it sounds so much better. Makes you sound so much more intelligent. Book talks about surgical power tools. These are always cool. It's kind of fun. For internal fixation, we're commonly going to use intramedullary pins, IM pins, sometimes referred to as Steinmann pins. You'll hear that used. We often have to cut the pin after it's in because it's too long, so we use a pin cutter. There are several types of orthopedic wires. There are, of course, bone plates, bone screws, all kinds of wonderful little things we can use to hold bone together. On the left, there's a air drill. There's several different ways to insert pins, screws, that sort of stuff. There are, of course, the hand tools, which are, there's a picture on page 28 of a hand chuck. Obviously, those are going to be cheaper. They're going to be simpler. If you're trying to get into orthopedics without putting a lot of money into it, that's the way to go. But then we get into some really nice, sophisticated, cool tools like air drills, which are hooked up to an air source, and those guys really do some beautiful work. On the right hand side, IM, intramedullary, Steinmann pins, bone pins, whatever you want to call them, that are commonly used for internal fixations. At the top, you got a couple examples of pin cutters. Most people, a lot of people, many people are going to simply use bolt cutters. They'll often soak them in Nolvasan from about the handles down, and then you can use those to cut off pins that are sticking out. There are specialized orthopedic pin cutters. They tend to be pretty expensive, and in most cases they really don't work any better than a bolt cutter does. Down below, examples of stainless steel wire that can be used for internal fixation of bones, wiring the bones pieces back together. Besides going in and obviously doing internal fixation, there are several different types of external fixations. We'll get into those more as we go. Here's an external fixation tray. Pins are put into the bones externally, held together. You've probably seen pictures of these in journals or in books and stuff. There's many different ways to hold bone together. It can be internal, it can be external. This is a good example of an external fixation tray with everything you need to do that. And the book talks also, just real quick, about a couple of neurosurgery instruments that we can use. Hall air drills, rongeurs, dental spatulas. Those are commonly associated with practices that do more neurosurgery, especially Hall air drills, which are really, really nice if you're doing any kind of neuro stuff. So that finishes that up. Next week we're going to jump into ophthalmic surgery instruments and get through that and some other stuff. That concludes this presentation.